There are moments in life when everything feels off. You wake up one morning and nothing seems quite right. The familiar comfort of routine suddenly feels suffocating. Conversations that once flowed with ease now feel forced, distant. You look at your reflection, and the person staring back at you feels like a stranger. At first, I thought it was just a bad day, a passing mood that would fade with time. But then it didn't. It lingered, growing stronger, seeping into every part of my life. I couldn't pinpoint when it started, but it was there, an uneasy feeling that something was shifting deep within me. Then, odd things began to happen. Little coincidences that seemed too purposeful to ignore. One morning, while scrolling through my phone, I came across a video that seemed to speak directly to my restless mind. It wasn't the usual motivational fluff. Instead, it talked about growth, the uncomfortable, messy, and often chaotic process of shedding the old to make way for the new. A chill ran through me. It felt like the universe was whispering in my ear, telling me to pay attention. Was it just a coincidence, or was it a sign? Later that week, while sitting in a coffee shop, I overheard a conversation between two strangers. One of them said, "Sometimes life feels like it's falling apart just before it gets better." I froze, pretending to scroll through my phone, but my ears were locked on their words. The other person nodded, adding, "Yeah, it's like the universe testing if you're really ready for what's next." My heart pounded. How could these random words from strangers align so perfectly with what I had been feeling? It was almost eerie. I couldn't shake the thought, was something bigger at play? Was I on the brink of a transformation I didn't even know I needed? In the following days, the signs kept appearing. A friend texted me out of the blue, saying she was making major changes in her life, leaving her job, moving to a new city. "I just felt like I was stuck," she said, "and I realized that being comfortable doesn't always mean being happy." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Comfort, that was it. I had been too comfortable. I had built a life that was predictable, safe, but also stagnant. Maybe the universe was pushing me, nudging me to break free from the version of myself that was too afraid to take risks. But even with this realization, doubt crept in. Change was daunting. What if I was misinterpreting these signs? What if it was all just a series of random coincidences, and I was reading too much into it? One night, unable to sleep, I sat by the window, looking out at the quiet streets below. The city was alive with the hum of life, yet I felt detached, like an observer rather than a participant. I whispered to myself, "Am I really changing, or am I just losing myself?" That thought haunted me for days. I didn't want to lose who I was, but deep down, I knew that holding on to the past version of myself was what truly made me feel lost. Then, something profound dawned on me. What if this feeling of being out of place was a sign that I was outgrowing my old life? What if feeling uncomfortable was the universe's way of telling me to shed my outdated beliefs and step into something new? I remembered a quote I had read from Marcus Aurelius: "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Maybe this feeling of discontent was not a problem to solve, but a path to follow. With that thought, a sense of calm washed over me. Maybe I wasn't falling apart. Maybe I was falling into place. The discomfort wasn't there to break me, but to push me toward growth. It wasn't about losing myself. It was about finding a truer version of who I was meant to be. From that moment, I decided to stop resisting. I would embrace the discomfort and see where it led me. Instead of questioning why life felt chaotic, I would focus on what this chaos was teaching me. I didn't have all the answers. And honestly, that scared me. But I couldn't deny the feeling that something greater was unfolding. All I knew was that I was being guided by signs, by intuition, by a force I couldn't quite name, but could definitely feel. And as strange as it seemed, I couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement amidst the fear, because maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something beautiful. A new chapter that I hadn't planned but was ready to embrace. The first step was simple. Though far from easy, acknowledge the signs and accept the change. I didn't have to understand it fully or map out every step ahead. I just had to trust that the journey would reveal itself as I moved forward. As dawn broke, painting the sky with soft hues of light, I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "It's okay to not know. It's okay to feel uncertain. Growth is messy, and that's all right." For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel stuck. I felt alive, like I was standing at the edge of something extraordinary. And instead of retreating, I took a step forward. Because sometimes, all it takes to begin the best stage of your life is the willingness to move despite the fear. When you start to change, it's almost as if the world around you changes too. Or maybe, more accurately, you begin to see the world differently. The familiar becomes strange, and what used to make sense suddenly feels out of place. That's how it felt for me, like I was stepping into a version of my life that looked the same but somehow didn't fit anymore. It wasn't just the little coincidences or the nagging feeling that I was on the edge of something big. It was how disconnected I felt from the people around me. Friends I'd known for years suddenly seemed distant, like we were speaking different languages. Our conversations felt forced, like playing a part I didn't remember auditioning for. One evening, I met up with an old friend at our usual spot, a cozy little bar on the corner of 7th and Pine. We'd spent countless nights there, talking about life, work, and our dreams. But that night was different. As she chatted about her latest office drama and weekend plans, I found myself drifting. It wasn't that I didn't care, it was that I couldn't connect. Her words felt hollow, like an echo from a life I was slowly moving away from. She noticed my silence and gave me a look. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes searching. I forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind." "Lately?" She raised an eyebrow. "You've been weird lately. Distant. What's going on?" I didn't know how to explain it. How could I put into words that I felt like a stranger in my own life? That the things that once made me feel grounded now felt suffocating. Instead, I just shrugged. "I guess I'm just trying to figure some stuff out." Her response was casual, almost dismissive. "You're overthinking again. You always do that." I wanted to agree, to laugh it off and slip back into our easy routine. But the words caught in my throat. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was overthinking. Or maybe I was finally seeing clearly for the first time. That night, after we parted ways, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. It wasn't just about her or the conversation. It was me. I was changing. Back at home, I sat in the quiet, trying to sort through the mess of thoughts swirling in my head. I felt like I was mourning something, the loss of an old version of myself. The person who was content to stay the same, to follow the same patterns without questioning them. That person was fading, and in their place was someone I didn't fully recognize yet. The hardest part was realizing that I couldn't go back. I couldn't unsee the things I had seen or unfeel the shift that had taken root inside me. As much as I wanted to cling to the familiar, I knew it wouldn't work. The version of myself that fit seamlessly into that old life no longer existed. I found myself scrolling through old photos, looking at memories that once brought me joy. Birthdays, road trips, spontaneous nights out, all frozen in time. Back then, I thought I had it all figured out. I was content. Or at least, I thought I was. But now, those same moments look different. I didn't feel the same nostalgia. Instead, I felt a strange detachment, like I was looking at someone else's life. I wondered if this was normal, this sense of losing touch with who you used to be. Then I remembered something I had read. You must be willing to give up who you were to become who you are meant to be. I whispered those words into the quiet of my room, hoping they would make more sense if I said them aloud. The next day, I tried to go back to normal. I followed my usual routine: work, gym, coffee with coworkers. But even at the office, I felt out of sync. The banter, the gossip, the small talk, it all seemed trivial. I found myself spacing out during meetings, wondering why I was putting so much energy into things that didn't matter to me anymore. At lunch, a coworker nudged me and asked if I was okay. I gave the same vague answer. Just a lot on my mind. It was easier than trying to explain the internal chaos. That evening, I got a message from my friend, the one from the bar. She wanted to check in, make sure I wasn't drowning in whatever was bothering me. It was thoughtful, but also made me realize how hard it was to explain that I didn't even know what was happening. How do you tell someone that your entire sense of self is unraveling? That your old life feels like a coat you've outgrown, too tight and uncomfortable? In the days that followed, I tried to process the changes more intentionally. I started journaling just to put the mess of thoughts somewhere outside my head. I wrote about the feeling of detachment, about how the things I once loved no longer felt important. I wrote about fear, the fear of losing myself, of becoming someone I didn't recognize. And slowly, through the ink and paper, a realization began to form. I wasn't losing myself. I was shedding the layers of who I thought I needed to be. I wasn't becoming someone new, I was becoming more of who I truly was. One night, while scrolling through old notes on my phone, I stumbled upon a quote from Epictetus. "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That struck a chord. Maybe the discomfort wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was a gift, a sign that I was finally moving past the complacency that had kept me stuck. I had to stop seeing this transformation as a crisis and start viewing it as an evolution. Yes, it was uncomfortable. Yes, it felt like losing parts of myself. But those parts had served their purpose, and now it was time to let them go. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. I wasn't completely at peace, but I was starting to understand that growth sometimes feels like chaos. I looked at my reflection again, and this time, I didn't see a stranger. I saw someone brave enough to question, to change, to evolve. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first real step toward becoming who I was meant to be. When the dust of realization settles, that's when self-doubt sneaks in. At first, I was convinced that I was on the verge of something great. I felt that spark of clarity, that hope that all this confusion meant transformation was on the horizon. But not long after, the uncertainty came crashing back. One evening, while going through my usual routine making dinner, scrolling through messages, I found myself paralyzed by the thought, what if I'm making a mistake? What if this need to change is just some impulsive reaction to stress or boredom? I couldn't shake the fear that I was throwing away everything I had built. My friendships, my job, my routines they had defined me for so long. Now I was questioning them all. Was I being reckless? Was I sabotaging my own life just because I felt restless? I decided to call my dad, hoping for some reassurance. He's always been my anchor, the kind of person who never seems rattled by life's chaos. As the phone rang, I tried to steady my voice, but when he picked up, I could hear the concern in his tone right away. "Hey, kiddo, you sound tired. Everything all right?" I took a deep breath. "Yeah, just feeling a little lost lately." "And he chuckled softly, the way he always does when he knows I'm overthinking. "Lost how?" I tried to explain it, the disconnect, the feeling of outgrowing parts of my life, the fear that I was making a mess of things just because I wanted something more. I expected him to tell me to snap out of it, to focus on what's stable. But instead, he just listened. When I finished, there was a pause before he spoke. "You know, when I was around your age, I went through something similar. I'd been working at the factory for years. It was steady, reliable, but I felt empty. One day, I just quit. Didn't have a plan, didn't know what I was going to do. Your mom thought I'd lost my mind." I hadn't heard this story before. My dad had always seemed so sure of his path. He continued, "For months, I bounced between odd jobs, trying to figure out what I wanted. Everyone thought I was crazy for giving up a stable job. But looking back, I needed that time to sort myself out. Sometimes, you have to let go of something good to make room for something better." Hearing that from him made something click. Maybe this confusion wasn't a failure. Maybe it was a necessary part of figuring out who I was becoming. But even with that comfort, self-doubt didn't just vanish. It lingered, whispering that I was being foolish, that I should just stick to what I knew. I couldn't shake the fear that everyone else was moving forward while I was unraveling. One night, I found myself browsing through articles on personal growth. I came across a piece about Epictetus, one of the great Stoic philosophers. It read, "Man is not worried by real problems so much as by his imagined anxieties about real problems." Those words struck a nerve. How much of my fear was based on reality? Was I truly failing? Or was I just afraid of the unknown? Maybe my biggest obstacle wasn't the change itself, but my anxiety about what change might mean. I started to realize that self-doubt is like a shadow. It only grows if you keep the light away. I had been letting fear dictate my perception, convincing myself that transformation meant losing everything. But that wasn't true. Change didn't mean abandoning who I was. It meant evolving into who I could be. A few days later, I bumped into an old acquaintance at the grocery store, Mark. We hadn't spoken in years. He looked different, more at ease. We caught up, and he told me about how he had quit his corporate job to start a small woodworking business. "I thought you loved that job," I said, genuinely surprised. He smiled. "I did, for a while. But one day, I realized I was living the life everyone expected of me, not the life I wanted. It scared the hell out of me to walk away. But now, I'm happier, more myself." As we parted ways, I couldn't help but feel inspired. Maybe I wasn't alone in feeling this way. Maybe a lot of people reach a point where they have to choose between comfort and authenticity. That night, I sat in the quiet of my living room, just thinking. I kept replaying my dad's words and Mark's story. Both of them had faced the same doubt, the same fear, but they'd chosen to follow their gut despite the uncertainty. Maybe that's what real courage is, choosing growth over comfort, even when the path ahead is unclear. I opened my journal and wrote down a thought that had been circling my mind. The fear of losing the old version of yourself is natural, but holding on too tightly only keeps you stuck. With every line, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Maybe I didn't need to have all the answers. Maybe it was okay to feel unsure. What mattered was that I wasn't letting fear make my decisions for me. After writing, I sat back and took a deep breath. For the first time in a while, I didn't feel completely overwhelmed. I knew the doubts would come back, they always do. But now, I felt better equipped to face them. I thought about another Stoic principle. First, say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Maybe the question wasn't about whether I was making a mistake. Maybe it was about deciding who I wanted to become and letting that choice guide me, instead of being paralyzed by fear. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. I wasn't completely sure of the path ahead, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep letting fear stop me. Change was part of growth, and I had to accept that uncertainty was just a companion on this journey. I made a small list of things I wanted to explore: new hobbies, different career options, even reconnecting with people who challenged me to think differently. I didn't have to make drastic changes overnight. I just had to take one step at a time. And that's when it hit me: self-doubt would always be there, but I didn't have to give it the power to dictate my choices. It could exist without controlling me. I realized that embracing change wasn't about being fearless. It was about moving forward even when fear lingered in the background. And that kind of quiet courage, that's something I could live with. Self-doubt is a relentless guest. Just when you think you've shown it the door, it slips back in through a cracked window or a half-open thought. After talking with my dad and Mark, I felt a sense of clarity, like I'd finally given myself permission to change. But that clarity was fragile, constantly threatened by my old fear of making mistakes. It didn't help that life threw another curveball my way. One morning, while going through my usual routine, I got an email from work. My department was downsizing. Just like that, I was out of a job. I stared at the screen, barely registering the words. My heart pounded, and a wave of panic washed over me. Losing my job wasn't just a financial blow. It felt like a confirmation of my worst fear that I was unraveling, losing control. As I sat there trying to breathe through the shock, my phone buzzed. It was my friend Lisa. She'd heard the news and wanted to check in. I couldn't bring myself to talk, so I let it ring. I just needed a moment alone to process. I kept thinking, what now? What did I do to deserve this? For hours, I stayed curled up on the couch, running through every mistake I might have made. Had I been too distracted lately? Too distant at work? The doubts multiplied, feeding off each other until I felt completely overwhelmed. When I finally got up to make some tea, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I looked defeated, like someone who had given up. That's when a thought broke through the noise one I had read not long ago. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. It was a quote from Marcus Aurelius, reminding me that obstacles are not there to block us, they're there to help us grow. But how? How could losing my job possibly be a good thing? I needed to get out of my head, so I grabbed my jacket and went for a walk. The air was crisp, and the city hummed with life, oblivious to my crisis. I wandered aimlessly, trying to make sense of everything. At a small park, I sat on a bench and watched a group of kids playing soccer. They kept tripping, falling, laughing, and getting back up. One boy in particular kept missing the ball entirely, but every time, he'd laugh it off and try again. I couldn't help but smile. He didn't see failure as something to be ashamed of. To him, falling was just part of the game. It struck me that I'd been treating every setback as a final verdict on my worth. Losing my job felt like the universe punishing me for daring to change. But maybe it was something else, entirely a push to move in a new direction. When I got home, I dug out a notebook and started making a list. I titled it, "What's Next?" At first, the page stayed blank. I had no idea what came after this. Then I remembered my dad's story, how he left a stable job without knowing what was next. It didn't ruin him. It reshaped him. I wrote down a few things I'd always wanted to try: freelance writing, teaching workshops, starting a blog about personal growth. As I looked at the list, a part of me whispered that I was being naive. Who was I to think I could just reinvent myself? I almost crumpled the page, but something stopped me. That kid in the park flashed through my mind. I thought about how he kept getting up after every missed kick, completely unfazed. I wanted that resilience, the ability to see failure as just part of learning. Maybe this was my chance to practice that. The next day, I woke up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, but I pushed through it. I applied for a few freelance gigs and started outlining ideas for workshops. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I kept reminding myself that every small step was a victory, no matter how insignificant it seemed. One afternoon, Lisa finally caught up with me. We met at a quiet cafe, and as soon as I saw her, the worry in her eyes almost broke me. I forced a smile, but she wasn't buying it. "I heard about your job. You okay?" she asked gently. I shrugged. "I don't know. It's weird. Part of me feels relieved, like I finally have the space to figure things out. But the other part, it's terrified." She nodded. "I get it. Change is messy, but you've been wanting to break out of that place for a while, right?" I hesitated, realizing she was right. I had been complaining about feeling stuck for months. Maybe this was the universe giving me the nudge I hadn't been brave enough to take myself. Lisa smiled. "Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us turns out to be the best thing in disguise." I thought about that for a while after she left. Maybe I didn't need to know exactly how things would turn out. Maybe I just needed to focus on moving forward, even if it was just one uncertain step at a time. Later that night, I wrote another entry in my journal. Embracing discomfort means accepting that growth isn't neat or predictable. It's messy, and it hurts. But that doesn't mean it's not worth it. I realized that I couldn't keep clinging to the version of me that played it safe. That person was too afraid to try, too worried about what could go wrong. I didn't want to live like that anymore. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and sat by the window. The sun was rising, casting a soft light over the city. I felt a strange calm settling in, a sense that maybe losing my job wasn't the end. It was just a detour, one that might lead me somewhere better. I still didn't have all the answers, but that was okay. I didn't need to. All I needed was the willingness to keep moving, to trust that the path would reveal itself as I went. As I sipped my coffee, I whispered to myself, "I'm not falling apart, I'm falling into place." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. After the initial shock of losing my job faded, I started to feel a strange sense of freedom. I had the space to think, to explore new ideas, to reshape my life. But just as I was getting comfortable with the idea of starting over, the universe decided to test me again. One evening, while catching up with Lisa over coffee, she dropped a bombshell that caught me completely off guard. "I've been worried about you," she said, her tone cautious. I raised an eyebrow, confused. "Worried? Why?" She hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. "It's just, ever since you lost your job, you've changed. And not necessarily in a good way. You seem distant, self-absorbed even. I just don't recognize you anymore." Her words stung more than I expected. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but nothing came out. Was she right? Had I become so wrapped up in my own transformation that I'd started pushing people away? Before I could respond, she continued, "I get that you're going through stuff, but it feels like you're just shutting everyone out. You're so focused on finding yourself that you've forgotten the people who care about you." That hit hard. I wanted to deny it, but the truth lingered in the air between us. I felt my chest tighten, guilt creeping in like a slow tide. "I didn't mean to make you feel that way," I whispered. Lisa's expression softened. "I know you didn't. I just miss the old you, the one who used to show up for people." After she left, I sat there alone, wrestling with the realization that maybe, in my pursuit of change, I had neglected the relationships that had always been my anchor. I'd been so focused on breaking free from the past that I'd overlooked the people who had supported me all along. Back at home, I couldn't escape the guilt. I replayed Lisa's words over and over, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. I had been so desperate to reinvent myself that I didn't notice how it affected those around me. Was I really becoming self-centered? The question gnawed at me. I didn't want to be someone who used personal growth as an excuse to neglect others. I needed to find a balance between evolving and staying connected. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, grappling with the idea that maybe personal growth wasn't just about shedding old habits, but also about nurturing the connections that mattered. I thought about a line I'd read from Seneca: "No man is an island. We must cultivate relationships, for they are the roots that ground us." I had become so focused on breaking free from my old self that I forgot to keep the parts that made me a good friend, a supportive presence. Maybe I was pushing away the very people who made me feel grounded. In the morning, I knew what I had to do. I needed to apologize and make things right, but I also needed to reconcile this internal conflict out to grow without losing my sense of community. I texted Lisa asking to meet again, and thankfully, she agreed. We sat at the same cafe, the atmosphere a little tense but calmer than before. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began. "You're right. I've been so caught up in figuring out my life that I didn't notice how I was making you feel." Lisa nodded, her shoulders relaxing. "I just miss talking to you like we used to. I know you're going through a lot, but you don't have to do it alone." Hearing that made me realize how isolating my quest for self-discovery had become. I was pushing away the very people who made my life meaningful. I guess I thought that to reinvent myself, I had to distance myself from everything that reminded me of who I used to be. I admitted. Lisa gave me a sad smile. "Change doesn't mean you have to leave everyone behind. You're allowed to grow and still keep your friends." Those words stuck with me. I had been thinking of change as a solitary journey, one that required cutting ties with my past. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe I could evolve while still holding on to the relationships that kept me grounded. After that conversation, I started to rethink my approach. I didn't have to choose between self-discovery and staying connected. I just needed to find a way to balance both. The next few weeks, I made a conscious effort to reach out, more catching up with friends, being more present in conversations, and sharing what I was going through instead of keeping it all bottled up. I realized that the fear of judgment had kept me quiet, but opening up didn't mean I was weak. In fact, being honest about my struggles made me feel stronger. One evening, while journaling, I wrote down a new thought. Personal growth doesn't mean isolation. True transformation includes learning to hold on to the right things while letting go of what no longer serves you. The next day, I received a call from my dad. He asked how I was holding up, and for once, I didn't just say I was fine. I told him about losing my job, the doubts, the fear of failing, and how I felt torn between change and stability. He listened patiently and then said, "Son, you don't have to do it all alone. Sometimes leaning on the people who care about you isn't a sign of weakness. It's a reminder that you're human." His words brought me a sense of peace. I didn't have to fight every battle in isolation. I could embrace change while still being supported by those who loved me. That night, I looked out at the city lights, reflecting on how far I had come. I wasn't the same person I was a few months ago, but that didn't mean I had to discard every part of my past. Growth wasn't about leaving everything behind. It was about refining who I was, keeping the good, and releasing the unnecessary. I decided that moving forward, I would practice gratitude not just for the new opportunities, but for the people who stayed by my side when I was struggling. I wasn't going to let pride keep me from being vulnerable. I would embrace change without sacrificing connection. As I fell asleep, I realized that the crisis of purpose wasn't just about losing a job or changing my routine. It was about redefining what mattered, holding on to relationships, staying true to myself, and being open to change without losing the essence of who I was. The journey wasn't over. I knew that. But now, I felt more prepared to navigate it, knowing I didn't have to do it all on my own. Embracing discomfort didn't mean abandoning comfort entirely. It meant being brave enough to grow while staying rooted in what truly mattered. Sometimes, growth doesn't come with fireworks or grand epiphanies. It comes quietly, like a whisper that you barely notice until it's woven itself into the fabric of your thoughts. That's how it felt after my conversation with Lisa. A quiet realization that maybe I didn't have to choose between change and connection. I could grow and still hold on to the parts of my life that mattered. Over the next few weeks, I embraced that idea. I made more time for the people who had supported me all along. I shared my struggles instead of keeping them buried. It felt strange at first, admitting that I didn't have it all figured out, but every time I opened up, I felt a little lighter. I wasn't just carrying my own fears anymore. I was sharing them, and that made them easier to bear. One evening, I decided to visit my dad. It had been a while since we sat down and really talked. When I arrived, he was in the garage, tinkering with his old motorcycle. The smell of oil and metal filled the space, and it felt oddly comforting. He glanced up when he saw me and smiled. "Hey, kiddo. Long time no see." I leaned against the workbench. "Yeah, figured it was time for a visit." He wiped his hands on a rag and gestured for me to sit. "You've been on my mind lately. How's life treating you?" I didn't sugarcoat it. I told him about losing my job, the panic that followed, and the confusion that seemed to color every part of my life. He listened, nodding occasionally, but didn't interrupt. When I finished, he looked thoughtful. "You know, life has a way of shaking us up when we get too comfortable," he said. "Sometimes it's not about fixing everything at once. It's about learning to be okay with the mess while you figure it out." I thought about that, and it made sense. I had been so desperate to put my life back together that I hadn't given myself time to just sit with the chaos. I wanted resolution without enduring the discomfort. He continued, "When I quit my job back then, I didn't have a plan either. I just knew that staying where I was felt like slowly suffocating. You can't always know the outcome, but you can choose to keep moving, even if it's just one step at a time." Those words stayed with me long after I left. That night, I sat by my window, watching the city lights flicker. For the first time in a while, I didn't feel rushed to find the answer. I just let myself breathe, acknowledging that maybe not knowing was part of the process. The next day, I started making small changes. I reached out to more friends, inviting them over for dinner or just catching up over coffee. I wasn't always good at explaining what I was going through, but I didn't let that stop me from trying. And each time I opened up, it felt like another layer of fear peeled away. One afternoon, I met up with Mark, the friend who had started his woodworking business. We grabbed lunch at a food truck by the park. As we ate, he asked how things were going. I was honest, told him about the fear of starting over and the guilt of feeling lost. He nodded knowingly. "Man, when I left my job, people thought I was nuts. My family didn't get it, but sometimes you've got to let go of the life you plan to make space for the life that's waiting for you." His words resonated deeply. Maybe I had been too fixated on holding on to a life that no longer fit. Later that week, I started outlining ideas for a personal growth blog. It felt intimidating, putting my thoughts into words for others to read. But I kept reminding myself that sharing my story could help someone else who felt just as lost. I wrote about the discomfort of change, the fear of stepping into the unknown, and the quiet courage it takes to start again. One night, after finishing a draft, I went for a walk to clear my mind. The city felt different, not as overwhelming as it used to. I realized that I wasn't as afraid of the future anymore. I wasn't clinging to who I used to be. I was learning to live with the uncertainty, to see it not as a threat but as an opportunity. As I walked, I thought about something I'd read from Marcus Aurelius. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. It hit me that I had been trying to control everything around me, when in reality, I just needed to master how I reacted. Losing my job, feeling disconnected from friends, those were just events. My reaction was what shaped my experience. Back at home, I made a list of what I had learned. Growth required discomfort. 2. Being vulnerable is not weakness. 3. Connection grounds us, even when we're changing. 4. Letting go doesn't mean losing yourself, it means making room for new possibilities. Reading over the list, I felt a deep sense of calm. I wasn't the same person I was a few months ago, and that was okay. I was evolving, and while it was messy and uncomfortable, it was also necessary. The next morning, I published my first blog post. I didn't expect much, maybe a few clicks from friends, but within hours, comments started appearing. Strangers shared how they too were struggling with change and uncertainty. One message, in particular, stood out. Thank you for being honest. I thought I was the only one feeling this way. For the first time, I felt a sense of purpose. Maybe sharing my journey could help others feel less alone. Maybe I didn't need to have everything figured out right away. I just needed to keep moving forward, one small step at a time. As the sun set that evening, I sat on my balcony, feeling the cool breeze on my face. I wasn't entirely sure where I was heading, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was learning to embrace the chaos, see it as a teacher rather than an enemy. I whispered to myself, it's okay not to know. It's okay to be uncertain. What matters is how you move through it. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Growth doesn't come from avoiding discomfort, it comes from learning to sit with it, to let it shape you into someone stronger, more resilient. I didn't have all the answers, but I had something better: acceptance. Acceptance that I was a work in progress, and that was enough.